Oh, sorry, I didn't see you there. Have any of you seen a drachma laying around? A drachma. Yeah, I had 10 of them, but now I can only find 9. You don't know what a drachma is? I'm sorry, you must be Romans. It's like a denarius. No, not a denarius either. Hebrew, you must be Hebrew. It's like half a shekel. Huh. Well, anyway, it's a little silver coin. It's worth about a day's wages, and I've lost it. I have 9 others, like I mentioned, but, it's not really about the money. I'm not going to starve. I'm not going broke, but I just hate the feeling when something is lost, It just drives me crazy. So I'll keep looking, and I'll find it. And when I do find it, it's going to feel so good. It'll be like when you finally reach that itch in the middle of your back, or when you check off the last box on a to-do list. Oh, that's my favorite. Who knows? Maybe when I find the coin, I'll actually just find something else to search for and keep chasing after that high. Which reminds me, I guess I better get back to it. But if you see a drachma lying around, let me know. The 3 parables we're dealing with today come on the heels of an accusation from the Jewish religious leaders toward Jesus. Look, they say, this guy welcomes sinners and even eats with them. I think Jesus loved hearing this. I think he relished the accusation. In fact, maybe he was even eating with more and more sinners, just hoping, begging, waiting for someone to point it out. Because he had 3 parables locked and loaded. And while there are multiple perspectives in these parables, and you'll get to hear from multiple of them today, only one is the focus of all 3. It's the perspective of the woman looking for her coin, the shepherd searching for his sheep, and the father watching for his son. In the parable of the prodigal son, it says the father saw his son coming while he was still a long way off. And I love this line because it means he was looking for him. After what was likely years, he was still watching, waiting, scanning the horizon, anticipating his son's return. He didn't give up, just like the woman would not give up searching for her coin or the shepherd for his sheep. The message is so simple. God doesn't give up. No one is too far gone or too deep in brokenness to be found, restored, and loved by God. Some theologians would even go a step deeper and say, with this interpretation, God can't stop. God won't stop until everyone who is lost is found. God just can't be complete without all of God's children. And when I think about this story, I think about the fatted calf. I doubt that the decision to kill it for the return banquet was an impulsive decision. No, I think the father had this thought in the back of his mind for some time. He wanted so badly to throw that party. He needed to throw that party. I think it kept him going, despite mourning the apparent loss of his son. I think it kept him scanning the horizon every time it crossed his mind. It's incredible how big an act of grace this is by the Father. In fact, I think it's so central to the message of the parable that we should retitle it, The Parable of the Gracious Father. But the point of the parable isn't just what we learn about God. It's also about how we are called to be gracious in response. And these 3 parables couldn't make it any easier. If you want to practice a perspective of grace, always be looking for a reason to throw a party. Hi there. I'm 87. No, I'm not 87 years old. 87's my number. Or, well, I guess it's my name, too. Who has time to name 100 sheep, right? Anyway, you're probably wondering how I wound up here, in the dark, stuck in this crack between the rocks, again. You see, I wander off a lot. I don't mean to. I get so distracted. I will see something shiny one moment, and then the next I've completely lost the flock. I try to find them again. I do. I'll climb up to a high part of the rocks, and I'll look around, but I don't always see them. Or I'll listen for the call of the shepherd, but sometimes I don't hear him. Anyway, the shepherd's always found me in the end, eventually. At least he has so far. Like I said, this isn't the first time I've wandered off, but I'm kind of starting to worry it might be the last. It's been a while. What if he doesn't realize I'm missing this time? Or worse, what if he realizes but doesn't think I'm worth searching for anymore? What if 99 sheep is enough? I just worry about it. I mean, sometimes I wonder if I finally Wait, did you hear that? There it was again. It's the shepherd's call. He's going to find me. He's going to find me. In the parable of the gracious father, there's a prodigal son, or sometimes a sheep. But regardless, we know this side of the story, right? At least we're familiar with the version of it as Jesus tells it. But this might be one that's easier said than done. Many Christians and Christian traditions struggle with how to take the prodigal son story and bring it into reality. The balance can be very hard to find. Sometimes we lean way too far on the side of guilt and shame. We emphasize not only the wrongness of our actions, but how they have affected our worth and how we see our relationship to God. After all, the prodigal son himself said he was not worthy to be a son, but instead that he should be a slave. But that's not what we should be aiming for. And other times, we have fallen too easily into a comforting role, so quickly jumping to God's forgiveness and grace that our actions take on no weight at all. There are no doubt benefits here. We're not burdened so much by guilt or shame, and we have confidence that our relationship with God can defy any odds. But nothing ever changes. We don't get better. The world doesn't get better because we don't have to face the very real consequences of sin. There must be a middle way, right? Now, since I didn't grow up Lutheran, Pastor Mark often likes to joke about how I'm being Lutheranized here at St. Andrew. And while he's joking about the Lutherification process, he's also right. One of the things I've learned in my short time as a Lutheran is that the practice of confession. And now, confession is something that would have given me the heebie-jeebies in the faith of my youth. But in confession, I've seen how we can acknowledge the way our actions shape the world, often in negative ways, whether or not we intended it. And we can do this because of our trust in the love and the grace of God, because we know it's steadfast. But even more surprisingly, I learned that confession isn't just an individual act. It's something we all do together. This weekend, a wildfire broke out at Milo McIver State Park. And it's the second wildfire in 2 years to come within 2 miles of my home in Estacada. There is no doubt among reputable scientists that these increasingly common natural events are directly linked with our human actions. In the liturgy which we used for the last several months here at St. Andrew, we confess together the way that we have elevated humankind over the rest of creation. We confessed our ignorance, our laziness, and our unwillingness to change despite the consequences. And really, we were acknowledging that we are, as many have said before me, a prodigal species. And we asked for grace. I believe that grace exists. Grace from future generations, grace from the creator of the universe, and certainly I believe there's grace to be given through science and through innovation. Grace can't just be given, though. It has to be received. Because if we can have a perspective of grace, but we can't recognize when it is most needed, we'll completely miss out. Can you believe this guy? Some brother, right? He's gone for who knows how long, doing who knows what, who knows where, and then he just waltzes back in here and he gets a party? You kidding me? I swear, youngest children will get away with anything nowadays. He goes up, a couple years ago, goes up to my father, and he says, "Give me my half of the inheritance." Now, I don't know how you do things around here, but where I come from, inheritance is usually given out after you're dead. So he basically walks up to my dad and says, "I wish you were dead," and then he takes his money and he goes off and he blows it. And now he's back, and it's not like it's good enough for him to have blown his own money, but now he gets some of what's mine too. I fed that calf every day for 2 years, and he gets to eat it? No way. That's mine. He didn't work for it. He didn't deserve it. He didn't earn it. It belongs to me. But Dad doesn't see it that way. I guess life's not fair. At least, not for me. Life's not fair. How often have we heard this phrase? If your experience is anything like mine, you were probably young when someone first said this to you, and it was probably used synonymously with the phrase, deal with it. Now, I have a myriad of issues with this phrase, beginning with its lack of compassion, especially when used towards a child who knows little of the harshness of the world. But even greater than that, I take issue that this phrase allows fairness to be painted as the ultimate value of a moral society. If only everything was fair, we think, then the world would be perfect. I disagree. I've been thinking a lot about this lately because I've been hearing a lot about this lately. Just a couple weeks ago, the Biden administration announced a massive plan to forgive billions of dollars in student debt, and the internet exploded with how unfair this decision was. Unfair to people without student loans, unfair to people who already paid off their student loans, and unfair to people who make too much money to qualify. Now, before I go any further, I'll admit I am one of the beneficiaries of this plan, but I will not recuse myself from the conversation. Because fairness wasn't the goal here, and it shouldn't be. There are far more gracious intentions behind such a decision, but this isn't always easy for us to see. In the parable of the gracious father, the older brother completely whiffs on this one. He is so concerned about fairness that he has come to equate it with justice. But fairness isn't justice. It hasn't been since we decided that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was a bad criminal justice system. But even more, fairness isn't grace. In fact, I don't think that statement goes far enough. Not only is fairness not grace, but fairness is often the very opposite of grace. I think most of us get this, at least in our heads. It's easy to understand when this concept links itself up with something that already matches our ideas or our political affiliations. But sometimes it can get trickier. For example, I had a Bible professor in college who was way overqualified for the role he had as a part-time instructor at tiny Warner Pacific College. Once, he was actually asked about this during one of my classes, and he told us that he had been looking at many different positions, but he was often surpassed by candidates who were people of color or who were women because the institutions where he was applying were recognized they had a diversity issue and they were trying to rectify it. Now, I can tell you this is not bad. He wouldn't say that this is bad. Diversity in upper education is very important. He didn't believe that what they were doing was wrong in any way. In fact, he told us that it was right and just, but still felt a little unfair. And as a straight white male who studies theology and is interested in academics, sometimes that can creep up in me too. But I said earlier that the perspective of grace is always looking for a reason to celebrate, a reason to throw a party. But I realize I might need to be a little more specific. Pity parties don't count. We're not called by God to be fair. We're called to be gracious. We're called to forgive far more times than social conventions would dictate, and we're called to not judge someone's future based upon the troubles of their past. We are called to selflessly forego fairness for justice, equity, empathy, and compassion. We are called to be party planners. Amen.